Hello, and welcome to my presentation. Fundamental Steps to Get Back on Track. Regime Analysis. Course GS 4010, Global Society. Structures and Stakeholders. By Dylan Mensberg. Institution University of Denver. Instructor, Professor Eric Fador. The focus of this analysis. My previous presentation was with regard to Japan's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the preceding actions to postpone the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games. I intend to discuss the regimes, actors, and institutions involved in this decision, whether or not this decision was sound, and what could potentially be added onto this solution of postponement to combat the global problem of the pandemic itself. Who actually postponed the Olympics? Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach have been working close together since 2013 to coordinate all the aspects of hosting the Olympic Games in 2020. There was hesitance on both sides to postpone or cancel the Olympics. However, pressure from other IOC members, as well as the WHO declaring a global pandemic, which by their definition is a worldwide spread of a new disease, pressured both the Olympic Committee president and the Prime Minister to agree to the postponement, which was ultimately the decision of the International Olympic Committee. Japan's contractual lack of autonomy. Upon winning the bid in 2013 to host the 2020 Olympics, the Japanese Prime Minister and the Japanese Olympic Committee were obligated to sign an 81-page list of stipulations that may cancel or postpone the Olympics. These stipulations include global catastrophe, war, and anything that could compromise the health of the athletes or the spectators of the Olympics, which of course would include a deemed global pandemic. This was not the first time, however, that Japan was in a lack of control in terms of their own hosting of the 2020 Olympics. In 2015, there was a change of venue of certain athletic events from Tokyo to the northern cooler region of Hokkaido, reason being that the Japanese summer heat was considered too dangerous to hold these specific activities. This was done without consulting the Prime Minister and caused a bit of conflict. However, Japan reached a tolerance with their lack of autonomy and power toward a lot of aspects of the Olympic Games, and when given the ultimatum to cancel or optimistically postpone, they naturally chose to postpone for the following year, 2021. Realist benefits from a cognizant lens. It's common knowledge that most countries do not profit monetarily from hosting the Olympics. Compensation, if at all, is at the discretion of the IOC. So what did Japan stand to gain? From the realist cognizant lens, Japan stood to gain intangible benefits from hosting the Olympics, such as power and respect and prestige on a global scale. A question remaining is, are the World Health Organization and the IOC able to be considered international regimes? By Brahm's definition, an international regime is one, an institution that reduces uncertainty or risk on a global scale, and also maintains international standards with all of its participants. Certainly, from the World Health Organization's perspective, the intent is to reduce risk and uncertainty with regard to disease, although that's, in practice, is case by case. And in terms of the International Olympic Committee, although it would be definable as an institution in the sense that they work toward specific international initiatives, the International Olympic Committee also has widespread international standards for every country that wishes to host the Olympics, which arguably could make it a regime as well. Was the postponement the best solution? Common sense would suggest yes. Mass gatherings on a global scale have been deemed problematic. From a liberalist or a realist perspective, it is beneficial to get this pandemic under control, as it has affected nearly every corner of the globe economically, diplomatically, and the personal health and safety of every citizen of every country that it's affected. So, that being said, what would be the issue? What would I argue against in terms of how the World Health Organization and the International Olympic Committee chose to go about this postponement? And the answer is I wouldn't. I wouldn't argue against their motivations nor their decision. However, where I find an inconsistency is in individual states, in terms of how individual states can apply the recommendations of the World Health Organization and the standards of the International Olympic Committee. Does not necessarily coincide with other countries. Various ways of living everyday life, resources such as health insurance, reliance on public transportation and private transportation, and varying constitutional leverage. Japan, especially from the Western perspective, gained some raised eyebrows as to their approach to the COVID-19 situation in terms of their deemed soft closure. From the perspective, especially in the US, Japanese restaurants and businesses were not required to close, and this seemed bizarre. The reason for this being is that the Japanese federal government does not have the leverage to force these businesses to close. They were able to highly recommend, however, they were not obligated to do so. And under that knowledge, a large majority of privately owned restaurants and department stores complied immediately. However, many chain restaurants and gambling parlors chose to ignore the recommendation. The Tokyo governor often went on television to shame these specific businesses and request their compliance, which eventually they gave, for the most part. However, it certainly is enlightening, as it's not a requirement, nor will it be. And if Tokyo intends to host the Olympics in 2021, those laws are still going to be in effect, or lack thereof. So what's the solution? The solution arguably is a compromise between the international regimes and the sovereign states, because the common goal is mutually beneficial in the long run. My concluding thoughts. On behalf of the World Health Organization and the International Olympic Committee, the role of the regimes in this case were spelled out quite clearly. Given the COVID-19 being deemed a global pandemic, it seems that the IOC acted appropriately and Japan complied. But the compromise relies on mutual respect between regimes, institutions, and foreign states, because ultimately it is beneficial from a realist and liberalist perspective, both similarly on an international, national, and domestic and individual level, to combat this pandemic earnestly, not only to resume the Olympic Games, but also to bring the world back on kilter. Thank you.